23. We were thumbing through the book and saw some of these. I do have it on video, don't I, Andrew? The video camera part. Little switch thing. All right. I was thumbing through the book. There's a lot of courses in here, but then I run across this. God is so good, and I know all of us know that pretty much. So let's sing that. Page 23. Turn to the book of James. James chapter 5. I've been trying to wait on others to be here before I went back to talking about Elijah, but I might not never get there. So we're going to look at James chapter 5. Looking at the life of Elijah. There's some things in his life that are important. I believe important for us to see. We talked about the man Elijah, first of all. We talked about how some people think that Elijah was a superhuman, but he's not. He serves the same God that I serve. And we're going to see that in just a minute from James chapter 5 once again. We looked at the name Elijah. His name means Jehovah is my God. And I tell you, looking at that, the names of people, names mean something. There's something in a name. You've heard that statement a lot of times, and that's true in the Bible. People named their children things that meant something to the times, to what was happening at the time or at the birth, at the time of the birth. But there's also some other things, some things that went on in the life of Elijah. And here's one I want us to look at: the problem of Elijah. Not him being a problem, but the problem during his time. The biggest problem in the time of Elijah was idolatry. The main idol that was worshipped, or God with a little g, that was worshipped, was Baal. Everybody's heard of Baal. B-A-A-L. And we'll talk a little bit more about Baal in just a little bit, just to open our eyes to Baal and what was the problem that was going on in Elijah's time. But James chapter 5, verse 17. Made the statement, a lot of people think that Elijah was superhuman, that he was a god. There are those during that time thought he was, or looked at him as that, but he wasn't. Here's what James said, and the Holy Ghost inspired James to write this. Verse 17, Elijah was a man, period. We could put a period right there, and that would be enough, but James went on to explain it. Elijah was a man subject to like passions as we are. And he was a man of God. He was a man, he might have been a man of like passions like we are, but he was a man of God. God looked on him like I think it was Dr. J. Harold Smith said about Brother Ray. He said he's God's pet. That's what he said about Brother Ray. He said, God just loves him like he does a pet. But he's subject to like things as we are, but he prayed and something happened. Here's what he said. It says, he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. Turn back over to 1 Kings chapter 18, and we come to the end of that 3 years and 6 months, or somewhere close to the end anyway. When you read the first verse of chapter 18, 1 Kings chapter 18, verse number 1 says, and it came to pass after many days that the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year. When he says in the 3rd year, he's talking about, after that time Elijah prayed. If you go back over there into chapter 17, you find Elijah praying, and he's before Ahab, and he says it's not going to rain for 3.5 years. And we're in that 3rd year now in chapter number 18. In that 3rd year, saying, go show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. That's what God told him to do. All right? At this time, some things are exposed. We're truly seeing Elijah now. We're seeing who he is. We're seeing what he's capable of. We're seeing him as God's man. And the problem, though, during that time, it shows up in King Ahab and his wife by the name of who? Jezebel. Jezebel. You've heard Jezebel, haven't you? Yeah. Everybody knows who Jezebel is. She was a bad girl. I mean, she was bad. But Jezebel introduced Israel to Baal. She was evil. She did not want anything to do with God, and she did not want anything to do with God's man. As a matter of fact, she was out to get Elijah all of his days. And you continue reading after chapter 18, you find that she's out to kill him because of what happens in chapter number 18. But understanding Baalism, that's what we call, paganism, Baalism, Mohammedism, Judaism. All of these religions of the world has that little ism after it, but Baalism. Baal, the name Baal means Lord, Master, Owner. You see, the devil always tries to mimic God, doesn't he? He's always trying to make one of his imps, what I call him, one of his puppets, like Baal. Baal was a man at one time, there on the face of the earth, and began to be worshipped. But Baal died. I was listening to somebody, I think it might have been Dr. Bagwell, but he was talking about how that there was a question came up about Jesus and whether he was real or not. And he said, okay, let's talk about some people that you'd probably know, some of these religions that had human leaders like Muhammad. Where's Muhammad? He said, oh, he died. He's in the grave. What about Buddha? Oh, he died. He went through several of those different guys, that once was worshiped, still worshiped, but they died. He said, well, what about Jesus? He said, hadn't thought about that. He said, well, I heard he died, but he said, I heard he rose from the dead. He said, well, what does that tell you about Jesus? Well, that's Baal. He's real, but he's not God. He's not Lord. He's not owner. He's not master. Let me go through some things quickly in my notes. He was the chief god worshipped by the Canaanites over in the land of Canaan. That's how the children of Israel got into it. God said, don't worship their gods. Don't have anything to do with their idols when you go over there. And what's the first thing they did? They started dabbling in those gods of the Canaanites, and Baal was the main one. There were 70 different gods that were worshipped in the land of Canaan. So that's why God was warning them. But the most popular of these gods was called Baal. Baal was the most popular because he was considered the god of fertility in all aspects of life. In human life, in animal life, in vegetable life, they prayed to God for multiplication of everything, fertility. He stood for production. He stood for prosperity. They depended on him for production and prosperity. Baal was considered as the god who has power over rain, over wind, over clouds, and therefore over fertility because of all of that. Baal was also worshipped as the weather god, the god of storm, the god of rain, the god of good crops. As you can see, that's very important to the background of 1 Kings chapter 17 through 19. Let me say some more things about Baal, and then I want us to look at what happens with Elijah. You see, worship was localized so that each area worshiped its own Baal. They had an idol to Baal set up in every little city. Every little village had its own idol of Baal. They didn't go to any central location except in their own village to worship Baal. And a lot of times they added idols to Baal all around. The result was a variety of names. All of these villages had names, and their names had the name Baal in them. Like a little place, Numbers 32:38 talks about Baal Meon. Judges 3:3, Baal Hermon. 2 Samuel 13:23, Baal Hazar. In 2 Kings chapter 1 verse 2, you've heard this in Baal Zebub. You've heard of that one. In Numbers 25:3-5, Baal Peor was a name. All of these villages, but they had the name Baal. That's because they worshiped Baal. He was their god. In Elijah's time, Israel worshiped Baal at Tyre. We've heard of Tyre and Sidon. We've read about Tyre and Sidon in the Bible. They're often mentioned together, but Israel, when they worshiped the god Baal, the Israelites went over to the village of Tyre and worshiped Baal. But get this, Jezebel was a Tyrian princess. That's where she was from. That's where Ahab met her. He started dabbling with Baal, and he met Jezebel. She was a Tyrian princess, and she introduced the worship of Baal into Israel. So she's the snake in the grass. Elijah, back over in chapter number 17 and chapter number 18 too, called Ahab the snake in the grass, but I'm going to tell you, he was a snake in the grass, but Jezebel was a snake in the grass. She was the one that brought it all in. And looked at all that to say some things, but I want you to know these things about Baal. Baal worship included these things. They offered incense and burnt sacrifices to Baal, Jeremiah 7:9. Jeremiah 19:5, we find out that when they're worshiping Baal, they sometimes offered human sacrifices to Baal. In 1 Kings 14 and 15, 22, we see that that Baal worship included sodomy, homosexuality. This is one of the darkest hours in the nation of Israel, in the land of Israel, in Israel's history. Jezebel killed all the prophets of God she could because they preached against Baal. Others flee for their lives. At one time, Elijah thought he was the only prophet left that stood for God, but God told him, if you'll remember this over in 1 Kings 19, verse number 18, listen to what God told him. God said, "Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel," and listen to what he says, "all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal." He thought he was the only one. He was asking God to kill him. Just get me out of the way too, God. He said, no, there's 7,000 more down yonder that haven't bowed the knee to Baal. So God thought it important to mention Baal, and that, to fight against him, to go against him. He thought all of these things. Leading in Baal worship, there were over 850, There were 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of the groves, and the groves were these outlying places that they worshiped, these high places. You've heard the high places mentioned in the Bible. That was the groves, and they were Baal worshipers. They were Baal priests. So there was over 850 priests, not prophets, but priests to Baal, and Asherah, which was considered a priestess of Baal. They worshiped her too. So this was the condition of Israel. But something important. I want us to read it, and then I'll try to be through. But in chapter 18 of the book of 1 Kings, verse number 7. Now I want to start there to everybody could see the importance of it. But verse number 7, God calls on a young prophet by the name of Obadiah. He wrote a book, the book of Obadiah in the Bible. But this young prophet by the name of Obadiah, he was bold. He wasn't living in fear, but he was trying to keep all of the other young prophets alive, and he was hiding them in caves everywhere. So God we just told you up in verse number 18, God told Elijah to show himself to Ahab, which could have been dangerous. Verse number 7 said, "And as Obadiah was in the way," they met up out there somewhere in the desert or something, Elijah met him, and he knew him, and fell on his face and said, "Art thou that my Lord Elijah?" And he answered him, "I am." But listen, Elijah he said it first. He said, "I am. Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah's here." He's told him to go tell his king. Go tell Ahab, Elijah is here. Listen to what Obadiah says, verse 9. And he said, "What have I sinned, that thou wouldest deliver thy servant into the hand of Ahab to slay me?" I'm trying to hide out from Ahab and from Jezebel to keep them from killing the prophets of God, and you want me to go stand before him, and he's going to kill me. Verse 10, "As the Lord thy God liveth, there is no nation or kingdom whither my Lord hath not sent to seek thee." And when they said, "He is not there," he took an oath of the kingdom and nation that they found thee not. So he's out to find you. He's hunting you, Elijah, and you want to stand before him? "And now thou sayest, Go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And it shall come to pass as soon as I am gone from thee, that the Spirit of the Lord shall carry thee whither I know not. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find thee, he shall slay me. But I, thy servant, fear the Lord from my youth." He said, was it not told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel slew the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50 in a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now thou sayest, go tell thy Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he shall slay me. He's scared, no doubt. You want me to go stand before him. And Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself unto him today. He tells him, I'm going to do it. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. Verse number 17 says, and it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said unto him, art thou he that troubleth Israel? In other words, are you that snake in the grass they've been talking about? Well, listen to what Elijah says. And he answered, I've not troubled Israel, but thou and thy father's house, in that ye have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and thou hast followed Balaam. You see that? Balaam. Baal. You followed Baal. You've forsaken all of the commandments of God, of Jehovah, and thou hast followed Balaam. Now therefore send and gather me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table. She had 400 that ate at her table. That's a lot of people. She fed them, not necessarily that they all came to her house and sat down at her table and eat, but she fed them. She made sure those prophets were alive so that they could lead people in Baal worship against God, against Jehovah. So Ahab sent unto all the children of Israel and gathered the prophets together unto Mount Carmel. And Elijah came. I'm about through. I just wanted to read through. I was going to read through verse 29. I want you to see this Baal worship. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him not a word. Then said Elijah unto the people, even I only remain a prophet of the Lord. See, he thinks he's the only one left. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let them therefore give us 2 bullocks, and let them choose 1 bullock for themselves, and cut it in pieces, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under, and I will dress the other bullock, and lay it on wood, and put no fire under, and call ye on the name of your gods, Baal, Asherah, call on them, whoever you want to. He said, and I will call on the name of the Lord. That's Jehovah. And the God that answereth by fire, let him be God. And all the people answered and said, it is well spoken. And Elijah said unto the prophets of Baal, choose you 1 bullock for yourselves, and dress it first, for ye are many. And call on the name of your gods, but put no fire under. And they took the bullock, which was given them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal from morning even unto noon, saying, O Baal, hear us. There was no voice, nor any that answered. And they leaped upon the altar which was made, and it came to pass at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, cry aloud, for he is a God. Either he's talking, or he's pursuing, or he's in a journey, or peradventure he sleepeth and must be awaked. He's making fun of them, wasn't he? He mocked them, the Bible says, and they cried aloud and cut themselves after their manner with knives and lancets, till the blood gushed out upon them. And it came to pass, when midday was past, and they prophesied unto the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, that there was neither voice nor any to answer, nor any that regarded. Baal is dead. He's gone. Then you continue reading. Elijah has them to rebuild the altar, puts the sacrifice upon the altar, has them to go down into the Mediterranean Sea. It doesn't say that. It has them bring barrels of water up and pour on the altar so that everything's covered, and the trench around the altar, there's water all in it. And Somebody said, well, it hadn't rained in 3.5 years. Where'd they get all the water? The Mediterranean Sea's right down at the bottom of Mount Carmel. So they went down there and got the water. That's where they got it. That's a big old sea. I seen it the other day, not in person. I was watching some videos of Brother Heath Williams. He was in Israel. He was in a hotel room way up on one of them high-rise hotels where they were staying, and he was standing out on the balcony, and the Mediterranean Sea was in the background. And it's a big old sea. It'd take more than 3.5 years for it to dry up. So they got the water out of it, poured all over that altar. Elijah prayed. He didn't have to pray very long prayer, 60-something words, I believe it is, that he said to God. But he said, God, I know you can hear me. They called on Baal. Oh, Baal, hear us. He said, God, I know you're hearing me. And he prayed that God would send fire down from heaven. Fire came down from heaven, wiped out everybody. And they killed all them prophets because they wasn't worshiping God. All them people of Israel that was standing around watching said, we know God, he is the God. We'll worship him. And they did. And we praise God that we see that we've got a God that's alive. Baal's not alive, but my God's alive. And he's well. He ain't even sick. That's what the little old girl said. He ain't even sick. My God's alive. He's well. And I'm glad to serve that God. All right, we'll have prayer requests at this time.